So it's windy today outside. I usually record these little intros for the podcast after the episodes, obviously at some different time and point and space and history, but it's windy outside. So if you hear the wind in the background, I apologize. I did everything that I possibly could to get the wind to stop, but for whatever reason, surprisingly, I didn't. I have the greatest gratitude. Gratitude's a good word to describe. I'm very, very humbled by the response that we get with this podcast. I love doing the podcast. It's such a wonderful opportunity for me to get to talk to a whole bunch of different people and all these different things that we get to discuss. But the fact that it continues to grow with each episode, each month, and more people are finding it and listening to it, I really, really am just kind of floored by that. So thank you, everybody out there, for listening. Thank you, everybody, for sharing the podcast and telling somebody else about it. As always, remember, it's energyislovepodcast.com. That has all the links to pretty much anywhere and everywhere you can contact, follow, listen, do anything you want to with the podcast. So go to our website and then jump out from there. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Crystal Water Float Spa. Crystal Water is located in Tooele, Utah. Google it if you have no idea where it's at. If you're in Utah, come out and float at Crystal Water Float. You get to lay back and relax inside a Dreampod. So Crystal Water Float Spa is the nation's only distributor for the Dreampod. When it comes to floating, there's a lot of different options available, I suppose, a lot of different things that you can lay back and float in. At the end of the day, they're all essentially designed to provide you with that type of experience of laying back in that 1,000 or so pounds of Epsom salt, water that's heated to body temperature, as little outside sensory annoyance. A lot of times all those things are annoying, but it's all the same in the end. You're just laying back and relaxing and floating. But the Dreampod is a wonderful tank. And like I said, Crystal Water is the nation's distributor of the Dreampod. Go to crystalwaterfloat.com. You can find out more about their center. Come out and float at their place. You can also find out more about the Dreampod if you go to dream-pod.com. Maybe you're looking to open up your own float center. Maybe you're that super rich podcast listener and you want to put a tank in your house. Well, that can happen now. Contact Crystal Water and get your tank shipped out directly to you. On this episode of the podcast, I had the wonderful opportunity. I always say that, but it really is wonderful when I get to speak with people. I had the wonderful opportunity to speak with Dr. Jason Gregg. Dr. Gregg has over 40 years of experience developing unique mental conditioning programs. Currently, he's now working at the Dreamwater Lab, where he's been creating Dreamscape Elements. Dreamscape Elements are a unique patented multimedia application designed to enhance the floating experience. So essentially, they're things that you're going to listen to during the flotation experience while you're inside the pod floating. And we talk a lot about those, but the cool thing about Dr. Gregg is he has such a wealth of information and knowledge and experience to draw from. So we got into a lot of different topics. We definitely touched on floating quite a bit. Dr. Gregg shared his beliefs and insights and opinions in regards to kind of the state of the float industry and where it's at right now and all those kind of different things. But he also dives into, because he's a psychologist, so he spent the early portion of his career working as a psychologist, which then led him into the space of learning about hypnosis and all these other kind of alternative ways of helping people. So it's both fascinating, interesting, thought-provoking, humorous at times. He's quite the funny guy. He's from Australia, so he's got not that Australians have a sick sense of humor, but he's got a good sense of humor. So sit back, folks, and relax and enjoy this wonderful episode of the Podcast for the Universe with my guest, Dr. Jason Gregg. Here we go.
You're listening to the Energy is Love podcast.
Energy is love.
The Energy is the Love podcast.
The Energy is Love podcast.
Energy is love.
The Energy is Love podcast.
The podcast for the universe.
The Energy is Love podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Jason, for taking the time to be on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it.
No problem.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe I'm not mistaken, you're in Manila, correct?
No, I'm not in Manila, actually. I'm on a different island. There are 7,400 islands here, but there are some major islands. And I'm on an island about an hour by plane from Manila. The city is called Bacolod, and it's right in the middle of cane fields. Less crime, better quality air, easier kind of living, and it's known as the City of Smiles. What can I say? So, no, I don't live in Manila.
So I guess I was wrong. Well, it's
The second prize is to spend 2 weeks in Manila. It's a pretty heavy place.
Yeah. Well, the Philippines regardless. And how long have you lived there?
I lived there for 3 years, went back to Oz again for Australia for 3 years, took my wife back so she could see where I came from. And then I've been back here for about a year. So I've lived a total of about 4 or 5 years in the Philippines.
You must like it then, huh?
A part of it was, yes, I don't mind it. I like the place. But the real issue was I couldn't afford to live in Australia anymore. I mean, it was just breathtakingly expensive. And the cost of living here is significantly lower. I can get most of the things that I want. I can't get a lot of the brands that I like in Western food. But no, it's an easy life. It just really depends on where you live. If you live down the south of the Philippines, it's pretty tricky. They sort of kidnap Westerners and behead them with monotonous regularity. But it's an easy place to live as long as you understand the rules.
My parents were way back in the day, long before I was born. They were in the Philippines for a few years. My dad was in the Air Force, and so they were stationed there.
Uh-huh.
And we like to joke because I've got 2 older brothers. And so my oldest brother was conceived in the Philippines.
Huh. Okay. Were born in the Philippines or just conceived in the Philippines?
Just conceived. He was born in the U.S., but...
Yeah. I'm a permanent resident, which makes it a little easier, but generally Westerners are welcome here. And I didn't know when I came here that I was tall, rich, and handsome. None of those things are true, but they generally regard Westerners, and particularly Americans, as, I guess, they envy our background and our country. And everybody that sort of sees white Western tourists, they yell, "Hi, Joe," which goes back to the American G.I. Joe occupation. So most of my time is spent saying, "No, I'm not Joe." So, but no, it's not a bad place to live, and it's good for the kind of work that I do, because by and large, I everything I do I sort of upload via the internet. So it's an easy, mellow place to live.
Very nice. Well, I want to dive into it. So first off, I guess we should have a small disclaimer that hopefully this isn't just an hour-long commercial for Dreampod. We're both affiliated and associated with Dreampod.
I'm not in the sales department, let me say that. So
I'm not either, so we're kind of safe there.
I love one. I've got one in my Dream Lab. But I don't sell them. I don't get commissions. I just use it for research mostly and for personal floats.
Well, that's the most interesting thing. I'm sure it's not the most interesting thing, but that was the thing I was most excited to talk to you about, is the research that you are doing and then what you're doing with that research and how you're incorporating it into floating. So first off, give me just a little bit of your background, if you would, so we can have an idea of.
Well, I graduated in psychology. I was actually in the American Army. I was in the Australian Army, went over to America, and joined the American Army. I was at Fort Sam Houston, or as we lovingly called it, Fort Sam Hilton. It was the medical corps of the Army. While I was there on the GI Bill, I did my bachelor's in psych. Obviously, I became interested in human behavior from a psychological point of view. I also did nursing while I was in the medical corps, so I have a fairly strong medical background as well, or at least a biology, physiology background. And I went into practice as a psychologist in Tarzana, California, in a local hospital. And that was interesting. I've got a million interesting stories, but that was interesting. The medical director, his key client was Charles Manson. And I had the opportunity to meet Manson, which was quite an interesting time. He would go out to the institution where he was incarcerated. And it was fascinating because we'd spend an hour with this man. When we walked out to the parking lot, we'd sort of look at one another and say, "No, are you joking?" He was so charismatic that he would almost convince you that it was okay, trust me. And of course, that's extraordinary. And from a psychologist's point of view, I was fascinated by how we are influenced. We're influenced in various ways. We're influenced by television or media. We're influenced by the books we read. We're especially influenced by authority figures and opinion shapers. And we're influenced by friends. And that can actually impact our wellness, our health, and basically our future. So while being in practice at the hospital for some time and seeing the same patients or clients coming back regularly, I mean, I was pretty good at what I was doing, but I wasn't curing anybody. I started to take up an interest in alternative ways of changing human behavior other than talk therapy and group therapy. I became interested in hypnosis. I got tied up with the University of California, Los Angeles. Was interested in some of the things that they were doing there with psychokinesis. I met John Lilly because that was I'm older than dirt, by the way. And while I met Lilly, I became obviously fascinated in floating because it just seemed to fit into what I was doing in the area that I was interested. I had a very rich education while I was in California. My next door neighbor was Robert Zimmerman, or better known as Bob Dylan. And I'm not name dropping, this was true. Ram Dass was another neighbor. So I had some really interesting inputs into my life. So this kind of shaped where my interest went. I became interested in alternative, effective ways of changing human behavior.
What was it? I don't mean to interrupt you. What was it that pushed, not necessarily pushed you, but why did you start looking in that area?
Because the traditional things that I was doing, would you like to tell me how you're feeling today, in the therapeutic 50-minute hour, people were coming back and it wasn't effective. And I felt that asking you about your mothers and your fathers and your brothers and your sisters and dwelling on the past wasn't doing a lot for the future. You were leaving my office with more insight into your behavior, but nothing was really changing. So I was seeing a high rate of recidivism. I was seeing people come back. I was seeing things not changing. So I was looking for more effective tools that I could use, or resources that I could use that might help the client or help the patient. I felt that setting myself up as the authority figure, the guide, was not the way to go. I felt that what I needed to do was resource my clients into ways that they could effect change in their life. And traditional psychology, traditional counseling just wasn't delivering. So that was a major reason that I went in that direction.
And then when it came to hypnosis, because in the realm of spirituality and the metaphysical and everything like that, a lot of the stuff that we talk about and get into on the podcast, sometimes people go into the in-depth in regards to kind of the neural pathways of your brain and how they're wired and how they're made that way and how you can rewire those pathways. And hypnosis has come up before on the podcast, but give me an idea if you look, because I love the fact that, like you said, classic traditional kind of sitting before the counselor or the psychologist and trying to talk your problems through. I think it works sometimes for some people, but I think by and large, you do need more. And so was there some aspect of hypnosis or something like that that really jumped out at you, or was it more or less you were just trying to look for anything and everything?
Yes, but let me address the point that you just made. What I'm not saying is that there isn't, let me put it another way. I'm not saying that there isn't a place for traditional talk counseling. In fact, many of us need someone to listen to us. We're in relationships, we're in marriages, we have family structures, we're in work structures. There are people that listen to us, but they don't really hear us a lot of the time. And the role that I found myself in was, I used to have it was about 6 foot, a big fiberglass ear in my office. And it was a joke. Somebody gave it to me. But that was the greatest tool I had, was to listen. And I believe that most of the answers for the questions that we already have inside. And my role was to lead you to that answer. In other words, for you to discover, talk out, try, rehearse different behaviors. So that, as I was saying, I'm not suggesting that there isn't a role for traditional psychologists. I was one. To some degree, I still am, and I still use a lot of those tools. Now back to hypnosis. Hypnosis is a very, very easy thing to learn. I used to teach doctors and dentists how to use it. It has a bit of an aura around it. It's becoming more acceptable as a therapeutic tool. But all it really is doing is what floating is doing most of the time. Now, as you know, I've been working on some applications for use in the tank or in the pod. And a lot of the elements of those applications are post-hypnotic suggestions, guided imagery, all the tools of hypnosis. The pod gets you to that point of relaxation. So I don't have to induce a hypnotic state. And what a hypnotic state is a relaxed a state of awareness where the subconscious mind is open to new and positive suggestions. If you float for about 20 minutes, you get to that state most of the time. You're either in an alpha or a theta state. So hypnosis back then was what I was trying to do that a Dreampod or any tank, any float device will do naturally. So I don't do much of that anymore. I use some of the elements of it.
So I love the fact that you said, first off, that when it came to the way that you viewed yourself when you were working in counseling and things like that, is just helping people realize some of those realizations that they do have that ability within themselves, or they have those answers. And that's such a huge thing when it comes to spirituality and energy work, because there's a lot of people that will work one-on-one with clients, very similar to that kind of psychiatrist type role, obviously without the schooling behind it or anything like that. There's trainings and certifications and all sorts of stuff, but a lot of times that's what it boils down to, is really just kind of being in that space with that person and helping them in that process of really understanding some of those deeper truths or meanings behind things. And then, like you said, they kind of already have the answers. You're just guiding them through that process of the realization of it.
I call it permission to believe. In other words, you want something different in your life. And my role a lot of the time as a psychologist was to give you permission to believe that you can be a different person, that you can change that behavior, permission to believe in yourself, permission to believe that you can achieve the goals that you have inside you. And I never set myself up as an authority figure or knowing more. I'm not an expert on your life. You're an expert on your life. If I want to talk about you, you're the authority on that. So again, my role was sort of teasing out, giving you permission to go there and try things. You could say anything you want to me. There's no judgment. And that's the role of the psychiatrist or the psychologist, in my opinion. And but I found that role was not the most effective role I could be in. There were other things I wanted to do. I became sort of the hitchhiker, going through the galaxy of different things. I looked at things like nutrition, supplements, sensory deprivation, obviously, sweat lodges. I could go on. I could write a book on or a menu of the things that I looked at that time, and I took bits of each, elements of each out of there. The people that I met, I took away thoughts, Ram Dass, and various other people.
How did you come about meeting John Lilly?
Carlos Castaneda. This sounds like name dropping. I'm sorry, but Carlos Castaneda was an acquaintance of mine, and I was told about him. I didn't know about. Well, I'd heard about Lilly's work with dolphins. Most people have. If you talk to people about, the guy that talked to dolphins, most people, maybe from my era anyway, knew about Lilly or knew his name. But I was really fascinated with the concept of depriving yourself or removing inputs. What would happen if we did that? And I tried meditation. I sat under the Bodhi tree for a week. I lived on a fascinating, well, it wasn't really a retreat. It was owned by a gentleman by the name of Thurlow McCoy, and this was in Latigo Canyon in California, just above Malibu. And this man had taken a beautiful piece of land, and I don't know whether you're familiar with Findhorn, but it's a place in Scotland where they grow vegetables. And
what's it called again?
Findhorn, and it's under the management of the caddies. But this man took the philosophy of the caddies and created this gorgeous organic garden, and he used to open it up to the public. And so all of these things just became sort of like a potpourri of ideas and concepts, music. I'm very attached to music, sound, and that got me to where I am today. I met Lily because somebody knew him, and they took me to him, and it was interesting. He was an interesting man, very interesting man.
Was he floating at that point?
Yeah, he was floating. The only difficulty I had with him, and I won't mention the name, but there's another influential person in floating at the moment, a self-professed guru of the topic. I don't subscribe to using drugs when you float. To me, it seems counterintuitive, counterproductive. To get high, to get loaded, and climb into a tank makes no sense to me whatsoever. And by the way, I've done my share. You can't live in California and not do it, especially at the time that I was in. I don't see the point. I really don't see the point.
Do you think at times that, because I personally have never had the opportunity, well, not the opportunity, but I've never floated under any sort of stimulus other than just me, right? Or a big pot of coffee.
Sure.
But I think that some people might benefit from the ability to relax, because we have a lot of people that float, or I've heard about a lot of people floating and talked with a lot of people that floating that are very, very hesitant at first and very nervous and anxious, and they have a hard time even getting over some of those issues to get into the tank.
Sure.
And so in my mind, sometimes, just something small and little, and it's not like they have to get crazy high, but, something to calm their nerves enough to where they can then get into the tank and go to that place.
Yeah, that's a point. That's fine. And I also don't think that floating is for everyone either. I think everyone could potentially benefit from it, but then everybody could benefit from eating organic food, maybe leading a better lifestyle, but not everybody's going to do it. It doesn't fit. They're too uncomfortable. Actually, I'm in a society right now, in a country right now, where culturally there's a lot of objections to floating. This is without going too deep into this, this is a very Catholic nation, and the church tends to have ownership over things spiritual. And as soon as you start to talk about mind-altering, hypnosis, relaxation, alpha, beta, theta, you're starting to raise issues that get into some sort of cultural mores. So I think that floating isn't for everyone. I think it's going to take a long while to educate people still, even though it's been around since, 1954 or so. There's still a long way to go. I have a lot of problems with the term, by the way, sensory deprivation. I campaign against that term.
Tell me why.
I think it's because it's not accurate. It's not accurate. If you look up sensory deprivation in Google, you'll find two major digressing pathways. One is floating, inevitably. The other is brainwashing. The other is hallucinatory behavior. It is not sensory deprivation. It's sensory restriction. There's various other terms, but sensory deprivation is I don't think is helpful for the industry. And it's a position. By the way, Sedfield and a couple of the others feel the same way, but I just don't think it's a positive term, and I don't think it is. I don't think it's good marketing. I agree. That's the bottom line. I don't think it's good marketing. We're going to put you in a sensory deprived, and so somebody Googles and said, "Oh God, I'm going to go crazy."
Yeah, that definitely has a.
There are other terms that we can use. There are other marketing terms. In actual fact, I think the float industry has a long way before it grows up. Do you remember chiropractors were fringe dwellers? The medical associations wouldn't have anything to do with them. Over time, chiropractors learned that how to play the game. They had solid research, they had colleges, they had institutions, they had rules for behavior, and they became acceptable. And I think to some degree the float industry still has a way to go. I see some absolutely outrageous claims. They're just not true, as Donald Trump would call it, fake news. I see some outrageous claims about what floating will do. It won't, or it might. But, to say that it cures everything, it's not a panacea. And once you start stepping into therapy as a topic, you're going to start to incur the wrath of those that, from the traditional healing sides, that will object. I think also the other hidden force is big pharma. Once you start to talk about the fact that you don't need analgesics for pain, and you're going to start to attract negative attention. So I think the float industry, and I'm very self-opinionated, you can hear that, needs to really establish some good, solid research. There needs to be a code of practice. There needs to be some kind of agreement as what we call it and how we sell it or how we market it.
I think that's probably, my guess is that that's coming when it comes to all these different things that you're kind of bringing up and talking about in regards to the industry of floating. I've only been involved in it in a very short time, right? I haven't spent years and years and years. And when it came to floating alone, just the whole idea or concept, it's probably been 3 or 4 years that it's even been on my radar. But I think that the industry will eventually, like you said, have to do some of those things and get over some of those hurdles in order to continue to grow, as opposed to, because it's been, like you said, it's been around since the 50s. It's not some new thing, but it's gone through periods of time where it was really, it wasn't well accepted. It wasn't well known. It's never really had its time in the limelight, I guess, is a good way to describe it.
An image is everything, especially if you're trying to, it's been around a while, but we know about it. The general public, the large mass of the public, oh, really? Yeah, I've kind of heard something about that. Image is everything, and there needs to be some sort of agreement on that image. If you're going to do the recreational float market, it doesn't really matter. That to me is hot rocks and massages and mani-pedis, and that's fine.
Yeah,
that's safe. If you follow the medical or therapeutic pathway, which is what I'm mostly interested in, by the way, you have to connect with referrers, doctors, academic institutions. I talk to doctor groups. I have a LinkedIn account with 900, this morning I think it was 900 doctors. They're all doctors. Every facet of medicine or healing that you could imagine. They're all in the Philippines, every one of them. I haven't even bothered to recruit outside of the area that I'm in. They're all very interested. But what I do is I deliver information in a non-sensational way, and so it's acceptable. Is that making any sense to you?
No, it makes total sense. Go ahead.
We just need to, I think the industry needs to, stop preaching to itself and stop patting each other on the back and saying, yeah, isn't it brilliant? You can do this, you can do it. We need to grow up. We need to find ways of sharing this extraordinary experience, self-healing experience, in a way that it is palatable to those that are in, I guess, competitive areas like traditional medicine, physiotherapy, psychiatry, psychology, without treading on their toes. And chiropractors worked out how to do that.
Yeah.
Osteopaths worked out how to do that. naturopaths to some degree worked out we need to do that too. If that is one of the roads that floating goes down, it does inevitably do that. I mean, once you start to talk about fibromyalgia and all the other algias and migraines, and yes, we can cure them, and come on. If you're going to say you're going to have a relaxing experience and will reduce your stress, that's safe. But if you start to step into areas that doctors are in, that the AMA is in, and the other institutions or organizations are in, you need to be able to support it with quality research, and I mean real research, not anecdotal research, and you need to find a good name for it, and you need to market it in a proper way. There needs to be some kind of organization or institution that takes responsibility for that, and I don't see that yet. I see groups that promote workshops, marketing, business plans, those kinds of things, but there needs to be some kind of institution that will act on behalf of the industry and bring the industry together. That, again, that's my opinion. That's just one person's opinion.
Well, I think it's a very valid point. Do you know what I mean? I think as the industry continues to grow, these are all things that a lot of people are looking at and thinking about and trying to figure out how to legitimize it in such a way so that it is, because I mean, the reality is, like you said earlier, is would everybody benefit from floating? I think so, but it's not necessarily for everybody.
No.
And
No.
When you get people that do have issues that are, you know, like you said, like fibromyalgia or migraines or things like that, I mean, I've seen people benefit and be able to kind of alter and change the way of their regular everyday life, where it had been such a burden to carry that illness or that disease. And with just simply floating, they've been able to just change the quality of life just improves so significantly. But I do agree with you that, you know, you can't necessarily make all of these claims or throw these things out there, even though they may be true or even though they may be based in truth. I think in order for it to really become accepted, like you're talking about, and, you know, comparing it to chiropractors is a really good example where, like you said, they had to become legitimized and looked at in such a way. And I don't think floating's there yet. I think there's probably areas of the country or the world where floating is kind of getting closer to that space, but as a whole, it's still on the fringe. And like you said, the vast majority of society doesn't even really know about it at this point.
No, and if you can't explain it to your grandmother, then it's not soup yet. If you can't put it in a package, a 1 sentence or 2 sentence thing that most people understand. I mean, I've asked people that are in the floating industry, what is floating? And some of the answers, I wish I'd recorded them. Some of the answers are extraordinary. If you talk to the float host or hostess or whatever that actually sees the client, do they understand why it works? What kind of information are they delivering? So I think also there needs to be some kind of cohesive training program, if that makes any sense to you, where we speak with a common voice. We all understand what it is, and we don't digress into sensational, panacea, cure-all statements. Yes, you're absolutely right. Fibromyalgia, low back pain, migraines, extraordinary, but it's anecdotal. There's nothing that the people who are in charge of the other side, the organized medical traditional side, they'll just discount it out of hand because they'll ask for the research. Yes, there's a lot of papers written on it, but they're limited. They're really limited. So anyway, I'm beating the drum a bit on it, but I've got some opinions on it, and it's best if I stop there. I think I'm mad anyway.
No, I think it's a good topic, but I do want to ask you, I want to get into everything that you're doing with the dreamscapes and everything like that in regards to all the different sounds, because it really fascinates me when it comes to sound therapy and all those kind of different things. It's a really big part of spirituality. It's a big part for me personally. I do a lot of meditation and things like that where I'll incorporate sounds. Mm-hmm. And so I have a couple questions right off the bat. If you could describe or explain to the listeners out there in the world the difference between like an alpha, beta, and theta brainwave and kind of the different when you experience them, I guess.
Well, brainwaves are interesting. That's a big statement, obviously, because they're ways that we describe the brain state that we're in. So they've almost become very trendy. I'm into alpha. What does that mean? Well, let's talk about the conscious and subconscious mind. In very ultra simplistic terms, the conscious mind is, I guess we could call it the gatekeeper to the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is very simplistic. It acts upon positive information. Again, sorry, with due respect and apologies to all, it really, whatever it sees and believes, it acts upon, negative or positive. So if I say to you, you're not going to smoke that cigarette, it's going to taste terrible, you're going to say, yeah, right, buddy, and you'll light up and enjoy the cigarette. But if I can create a relaxed state where the conscious mind, the gatekeeper, is out of the picture, relaxed, we can then address the subconscious mind. We can introduce new, and it must be positive. You can't use the word not, no, or I can't get you to do things you don't want to do. I can introduce new ideas or concepts, and the subconscious mind is liable to act upon those. So that goes back to hypnosis again. First of all, I induce a hypnotic state. It could be alpha, it could be theta, whatever, but it's a relaxed state where the conscious mind is sort of out of the picture. And I then make suggestions, often new information to the subconscious mind, like every time you light a cigarette, it will taste unpleasant. You'll go longer and longer between cigarettes. Eventually, the idea, the concept of smoking will have left you. You'll be a non-smoker. So with these programs, with the Dreamscape programs, we utilize the float experience, which naturally induces a brain state. Generally is described as theta, but it's alpha. Alpha is actually a better learning state than theta. And then new information is introduced to the subconscious mind. So, but there's also another fascinating brain state called gamma. That's up around the 40 to 60 to 80 cycles per second. And I also use that. There are programs that I've developed that use the gamma brain state. But most of the things that you would do in a tank, most of the things you do when you're floating, most of the things that you do with meditation would be alpha, theta. When you are meditating, what you are looking for is that theta state, an ultra-relaxed state where you're very aware, you're awake, but the subconscious mind is open to new information. That's why we get a flood of ideas when we're floating. You think, well, if I go in there, I'm just going to go to sleep or I'm going to be hypnotized. No, most people, myself, I'm sure you do, experience a flight of ideas, maybe vivid pictures, repressed memories. It's not an inactive state. It's a very active state, but the conscious mind has been removed from the picture. So the gatekeeper, the fat controller, is out of the picture for the time being. Is that giving you what you're looking for there?
Yes, yeah. It's all fascinating to me when you start, diving into trying to pick apart the brain and the different natural rhythms and states that it goes into. And then in those states, because I've experienced so many different things, not just in floating and in meditation, but because sometimes I think you go to those places outside of those kind of experiences where, you're going into a float maybe with that purpose or even with just the purpose of relaxation, and it happens naturally. But I think sometimes your body, your subconscious almost takes over from that conscious portion and forces you into that state, because I think it's so incredibly beneficial for us to be there, like in that alpha and theta state.
Sure.
Because of the relaxation that can happen.
And you can't stay there all day. That's, you can't stay in alpha, you can't stay in theta, you can't stay in the dream state all day. Life would pass you by. Or But why you're taking time out, you're taking time to go to a place. One of the things that I really, really like about floating is it's self-help. There's no authority. Even the Dreamscapes applications that I'm developing, there's my voice, there's guided imagery, there's sound, there's music, there's entrainment, which is something I want to cover in a second. All of these things are only there to potentiate the learning state, to deliver new information. But it's really about the floater, the listener, the user, adapting, adopting and acting upon those suggestions. I said I wanted to talk about entrainment for a moment, just very quickly. When I sort of go through, and I check out all the float centers, as many as I can on Google, and a lot of them are beginning to talk about this active floating, this exactly what we're doing with Dreamscapes, using the float situation, replacing the ketamine and the drugs that Lily used with audio. Essentially, that's what we're doing. By the way, my pod is hacked. It doesn't look like anybody else's. It's got some other tricky things in it. But generally, using that relaxed brain state to change behaviors. So it goes from passive to guided or active floating. When I look at a lot of the float centers that are dabbling in this, they're talking about binaural sound, and it's wrong. It doesn't work unless you've got headphones on, and there are such things as waterproof headphones, which involves tethering the floater with a cord. There's no oral separation. So to use the word binaural entrainment is functionally incorrect. It doesn't work because you can't separate it. So it will not produce entrainment in the brain. It's just wallpaper. One of the difficulties that I'm having at the moment with the Dreamscapes applications is that the Dreampod itself has speakers built into it, as you know. The problem with it is, as you naturally drift, the volume and, in fact, the resolution of the sound changes. So ideally, headphones or some way of keeping the sound, the levels constant, is the best solution, but there is no way to do that right now.
So I want to go back because you mentioned binaural entrainment. Yep. So I want to understand, or hopefully you can explain to me, because there's a lot of meditations that focus on binaural beats and rhythms and things like that. What exactly are they referencing? Okay.
If I take a pulsing sound of, say, 400 hertz, 400 cycles per second, so bum, 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 and I put that in one ear, and I take a similar sound, but this of, say, 408 cycles, bum, 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 bum. I introduce both of those through headphones, and we must have separation. That's a very important thing. The brain creates what is called a following frequency, which is the differential between the two frequencies. So in this case, it would be 8 cycles, which is approximately alpha. Just that simple. So binaural entrainment is a process to get the brain to go to that 8 cycle stage, 8 frequency stage, which we describe as alpha. Is that answering your question?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a way to kind of trick the brain in a sense to go into that space where you would ideally meditate or, that alpha theta state, right?
Yes. And as I say, when you're floating in water and you're listening to surface mounted speakers or transducers, there is no separation. You're getting basically the same sound, the same frequency in both ears, unless you use a headset or something that separates the two channels. Now, there is an alternative process that you can use to entrain, which is what I use. The system I use, by the way, is patented. I've been at this for a long, long while, and I use different techniques to produce entrainment. But I must say one thing, that the pod, or the act of floating, produces this state. So if you don't interfere, you don't meddle with it, the floater naturally goes to a state. You don't need entrainment to get them there.
So in that state, when somebody does get to that state, is the idea behind, because for me personally, when I meditate or when I float, when I get to that place, because you mentioned earlier that subconscious mind is very active, that things you'll get a lot of information and a lot of feedback and insight to certain things. That's also the place where a lot of people through meditation, where, in floating as well, where they'll start to talk about out-of-body experiences and these crazy visualizations of things that they're seeing. Do you think that there's a scientific explanation, or what is the scientific explanation for those type of experiences that people have? Do you think that there's some aspect of the subconscious that is at role, or is there something greater out there?
Well, both. And it's also biochemical too. The activity of the brain can produce hallucinations. It's left my mind at the moment. See, that's the problem from being old. But there's it's got a name and it's not coming to me, but there's a process where if you remove sensory inputs, it can cause hallucination. My original thesis was written on brainwashing, funnily enough, what the Brits were doing using during the war. Different kind of thing altogether. But if you remove all sensory inputs for a prolonged period of time, there is a process whereby the brain starts to hallucinate. This has nothing to do with floating. I might add, nothing to do with floating. This is a different process. But the brain starts to confabulate or fill in the gaps, starts to look for or create inputs because it's not accustomed to being without them. Floating, that doesn't occur. That's not what's happening in floating. It's a different process altogether. Repressed, in answer to your question specifically, repressed thoughts and in the subconscious, past images, and as I say, it can be biochemical as well. But again, I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, you did. Because for me personally, and we could go way off the deep end, and sometimes we do on the podcast, because the spiritual aspect of not just floating, but meditation, but some of those greater experiences of things that can happen in those places and in those experiences. For me personally, I think that when I get to that state, when I get into that alpha and theta brainwave state, whether it be in the tank or be, just through meditation or whatever it is, I feel like sometimes the information that I receive doesn't stem from me, that I'm connected to some other thing. And that's a very common phenomenon. Excuse me. My best work comes through me, not from me. That may be a familiar statement to you. Mm-hmm. Where are these words that I'm saying right now coming from? I'm in the zone. I'm writing and it's just brilliant. And other times you can't find it. It ain't there. That's kind of what you're talking about. So if we can accept that they may be coming from an external source, or it can be coming from an internal source, experiences forgotten, subliminal inputs that we've had in the past that we weren't aware of. That could be the source of these things happening. That's a good thought. I like that idea that, those things are just coming from inside the internal aspect of yourself, that subconscious. That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. As I said before, most of us already have the answers within. I'm of the belief that we're born with infinite wisdom. We just need to find it again. Instead, we seem to be getting more stupid. And I won't bring up the election again, I promise.
Yeah, it's a sad state over here in the U.S., that's for sure.
Oh, God, we're in trouble. And I say we because the impact of that is enormous.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people don't take that into consideration, even though we hear that and see that in the media. I think that like the average Joe citizen in America doesn't really necessarily realize the impact of what happens here affects the world globally.
Oh, it does. And we have a president in this country that's out of the same mold as Trump. He's decided that the way to get rid of drug users is to shoot them. And I think he's summarily executed something like 7,500 and counting.
Oh, wow.
Without recourse, without punishment, without any judicial interference. So, and I guess the point I'm making here is these are our policy makers. They influence the spend on education, on research. They virtually are molding or creating our kids' world, the ones that they're going to inherit. And I think that's an awesome responsibility. And to see it in the hands of somebody like that scares the hell out of me, especially if I was, bringing up kids today and this was the world that they were going to enter into. I mean, I'm very fond of the United States. I lived there for a long while. And I walked into the United States exactly the week they started the Watergate trials. And it was the most fascinating television I'd ever seen in my life. Then I went through the periods of the safe hands, the presidents. There were some of them bumbling. I remember Gerald Ford. I was near the Firestone University, and in California, I lived near it. And Gerald Ford helicoptered in to open the new sports center, and he summarily opened the Fieldstone Firehouse rather than the Firestone Fieldhouse, which was rather fascinating. But it was basically a safe pair of hands. Obama was a safe pair of hands. In this country, Aquino was a relatively safe pair of hands. Where are we now? And without getting too political, this will determine, as I say, what we spend on research and the direction of the country. And I guess the general feeling of the country, how we feel about our country and ourselves. And
I've got kids, right? And we've got 4 teenage girls, my wife and I. Not 4, 3 teenage girls. And we got a 10-year-old boy.
Oh, okay.
But when it comes to politics, when it comes to the state of the nation and everything like that, and all the stuff that's going on right now, they get very much involved in it because they're at that age where they, none of them can vote yet, but they're getting to that age and they're very interested and very opinionated, and they think they completely understand all the different dynamics of stuff that takes place. But at the end of the day, I always try to keep them grounded in that space of, yes, that those decisions that are being made, those policies that are being put into place, they do affect us, but only to a certain extent. And when it comes to our everyday life, the vast majority of things that we're going to be doing and moving through isn't going to be drastically affected by the choices that are made up there in Washington.
Yeah, I would describe myself as a futurist. But I was talking to somebody yesterday about the good old days, that term, the good old days. And I think I've lived in them, at least my good old days. So I tend to dwell on the future because that's the only impact I can have, the now and the future, let's put it that way. And the work that I do, I thoroughly enjoy. I'm totally immersed in it. I have a Dreampod that looks like nobody else's. It has photic lights inside it. It's plugged into ECGs, EKGs, all kinds of tricky little things inside this pod of mine. I've got wave inducers to create sonic waves in the water. None of them are commercial. We're not going to be putting flashing lights in pods because the impact on things like epilepsy. But the only thing I don't do is I don't play around with drugs in the pod itself. I think we've got a long way to explore with floating, but just the process of getting inside, laying down in hypersalinated, thermoneutral fluid and just chilling out is absolute magic. And perhaps we'll go all in a complete circle and come back to that again and say that's what it is. But my day-to-day work is looking at alternative ways of using that environment.
So tell me, outside of creating the dreamscapes and everything like that, do you have a kind of a purpose behind the research that you're doing? Do you have an end goal in a sense that you want to try to get to with it?
Well, I mean, I've got a personal philosophy. I want to leave this earth with leaving it better than I found it, with something. I've got a very intact ego. I don't look for my name to be published. I don't want to become the next Rogan or whatever. I just do what I do. The company does the marketing, and that's fine. But my real purpose is to change how people feel, change their behavior. I mean, I've worked with smokers. I've worked with people that are obese. I've worked with people that have chronic long-term pain. And I've managed to facilitate change in their life. That is a reward. And that's basically what I'm doing now. That sounds altruistic and the trumpet's playing in the background, but fundamentally that's what drives me. I want to see change. I want to help people live better lives. I can't think of any other way of saying it. And as I say, I'm not doing it to be rich or famous. I'm poor, actually. In spite of living in the Philippines where I'm supposed to be rich. But I just want to see change in people's lives. I want to see self-actualized change too. I want them to take responsibility. I want to give them the tools whereby they can affect that change. Not owe it to me. I didn't do it. They do it. So the Dreamscape applications are tools or resources that people can use to change unwanted behaviors and enhance human performance.
Do you know, I probably should have researched this question a little bit better before myself, but do you know if, as far as when the Dreamscapes become available, are they going to be to Dreampod owners only, or are other people in the realm of floating, in the industry of floating, are they going to have access to some of these?
The company is going to make, well, the way we're talking about the marketing, we're still setting it in place, but every Dreampod purchaser will get 3 bundled programs, one for stress, one called mental detox, and the other is actually not an in-pod application. It's called Breathe Easy, which facilitates coherent breathing, which has impact on heart rate variability, and it helps look after your heart. It's a whole long subject, and we could get off on that. But the bottom line is every Dreampod that ships from now on will have those 3 elements built into them. In the meantime, those that already own Dreampods will have access to download those as well. The other applications, and I think there's about 40 of them that I'm working on at the moment, will be available on a pay-to-play basis. And as I say, that's still to be resolved. But there'll be applications for smoking, weight, pain, meditation, jet lag, power learning, all kinds of diverse topics. So that they will be only available, to answer specifically your question, they'll only be available to Dreampod owners, because the Dreampod itself will download them. They'll be downloaded directly to the Dreampod.
Yeah.
That's because of the magic. This is an amazing device because it has its own brains inside it, and it's communicative. Eventually, that market will probably plateau, become saturated, and the owners of the company will probably look to begin to market those or versions of them to other float tank pod owners. But for the time being, for the moment, I guess we're exploiting the market advantage of having our own. I've also got to mention too, once somebody comes with a good idea, especially in the realm of marketing, which is not my area of interest, everybody does it. If it sells lots of Dreampods, everybody else will be doing it. Some will be good, some will be better, some will be bloody woeful. But, if it's a good idea, let's all do it. And that's fine, as long as they're good applications. But the early adopters can get them if they buy a Dreampod. That's how it works right now.
Well, Jason, I can't thank you enough, man. It's been really, really interesting and wonderful chatting with you. I was excited to do this interview, and we could probably chat for hours and hours and hours. I could pick your brain some more. But
sorry for the run-on sentences and the rambling. I tend not to be media-oriented. I tend to live in my own world. But if you can sift through it and get something that's useful, I'm happy.
No, you did wonderful. And even outside of, because it's morning time there, right?
It is.
It sounds like you got rush hour traffic in the background there, man. It sounds like it's pretty busy.
No. That's quiet traffic. That's quiet traffic. You have no idea how noisy this country is. They have a policy here. You've got a horn, use it. And they just use it constantly. They sit beep, beep, beep everywhere you go. You're riding a cab, he's blowing the horn for no particular reason. The other trick they do is they take the mufflers off vehicles and just put straight through pipes. So the traffic rules we have in Western countries do not apply in the Philippines. Make as much, and karaoke is another additional feature of living here. But apart from, and barking dogs, I could go on, but it's a very noisy country, and I'm sorry I couldn't make it quieter in the background, but it's where my office is. And by the way, the office is double glazed. What can I tell you?
No, it definitely works, and I do appreciate it. I know that we'll have more information when the Dreamscapes become available all over dream-pod.com. Obviously, they can go learn more about the Dreampods there. Is there anything else that you'd like to throw out before we wrap up?
No, I'm going to go and have breakfast. I hope that this was what you're looking for. I really do.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
And I hope your listeners get something out of it as well.
I'm sure they will. Thank you very much, and everybody go out and have a beautiful, wonderful day.
Most of the answers for the questions that we have, we already have inside. I call it permission to believe. I became sort of the hitchhiker going through the galaxy of different things. We're born with infinite wisdom. We just need to find it again. The conscious mind is the gatekeeper to the subconscious mind.